Hey guys, just a disclaimer before we get into this. I am just a guy who likes working on his KLR. I am not a licensed mechanic, nor am I a motorcycle mechanic. I am completely self-taught, and so take that for what it's worth. These are just some of the things that I've found that help me out, and I wanted to share them with you guys. But if you're not comfortable doing this, please contact your service department and they can do the work for you. Cheers. Well, good morning guys. Mason here. Now, I don't know if you've been following along on Instagram or not, but if you have likely seen that I had a bit of a day last weekend on our trip. We decided to do a shakedown run for our next TCAT leg, and we did a run around Manitoulin Island and came the long way around down through Muskoka and home. Now, as we headed across the top near Sudbury, I had a flat tire.
Yeah, nice. Woo! Is this really loose or is it just me? The road. Okay, I got a tire going down, boys. Something's wrong. I'm stopping. I'm sorry. I don't know what's up, but I am all over the place.
Oh, it's like flat now. Well, here you were vlogging about changing this prick on the side of the road. Here we go. No worries. It's not like you said, F it, I'm having a flat tire now.
So I was able to use everything that I had on the bike to change that rear tube. That went well. But then as we headed south down towards the Muskoka area, poor old Shelburne, my KLR, decided to have a little bit of a burble, and actually it quit at 120 on the highway, and I rolled to the shoulder and it restarted, but it would only run about half throttle. I could get up to 70 kilometers an hour along the shoulder if I was running with my choke on, but we knew that we had to stop and start to diagnose what was going on there. Found ourselves a little gas station to pull off to, and then we ended up doing a carb tear down and clean right on the side of the road. So a field service of a carburetor. And it didn't take us very long. There's a couple tricks to make that go a little bit quicker, and that's what I hope to share with you today. All right, so as you can see, the KLR right now is completely stripped. So I've brought it home, I'm doing a bunch of maintenance to it, I'm checking the valves. New tires are on the way, I'm gonna get that done out of the way before the trip. Go back to my TKC 80s, but that's another story completely. While I'm into it, I thought let's get into this and show you guys some tips for how to service your carburetor on the side of the trail without getting into a major teardown. Now, I know this looks a little aggressive right now, and you don't have to go this far into it, that's the thing. So what you need to do is you need to remove both side panels, both rear side panels, and your seat. And then by undoing these two screws in the fairing and the two screws that connect the side plastics to the tank, and then you can pull your gas tank out. You have to undo your fuel line and your vent tube, take out these bolts, and pull your gas tank. So that's both rear sides, the seat, and the tank off. Everything else can stay. Those two front fairings can stay on, all the front stays on. That's it, it's not bad. 2, 4, 6, 8 bolts and 2 tubes. The fuel line and vacuum line if you still have the old petcock, and the vent line. And that's it, then you're into it. And from there on it actually gets a little bit simpler if you don't have the Cogent suspension on. So for me, what I had to do was I had to remove my adjuster to get to a screw in here, and that's what I'm going to show you right now. So let's start there. So now that that's out of the way, this is the way your stock KLR looks. There's a cover plate that goes over here that protects these electronics with a bolt. So you take that bolt out, your cover plate off, and then all of this gear is held onto this bracket by a bolt back in here. And you have to take that off because we need that bracket out of the way, and I'll show you why in a second. So we're going to remove that bolt back in there under the airbox. So that's just a 10 mil. It comes out, and that frees up all of this space here. And you can just push this gently out of the way, and you're good to go. Now the next thing we need to do is we need to pull out this elbow here, where the choke cable, where is it? This is the choke cable where it runs into the back of the carburetor. And what you want to do is grab it nice and square and just pull straight out. Not bending, just like that. You don't want that in place, because if you try to tip the carburetor with that in, that little plastic grommet in there can break. So you just pull that straight out like that and just make sure it's loose. Now I have the head off to check my valves, so usually the head's on the motor there and you don't have to get into any of that. But on this side, what you want to do is you want to loosen both sides of the throttle return cables so that we can take them out of this housing. For that you need your 10 mil wrench. We don't have to change any of the adjustments. We're just going to loosen this top nut off, the captive nut. The bottom nut is the one that sets your adjustment, and then we're going to slip that out of there. And then these, you just pivot them down to the slot and slide them out of their clip. Like so. Same thing with this one. Find where the cable lines up with the slot in the bracket and wiggle him out of there. And that's those two out of the way. Next, this bracket here has to come off, or it will hit when we try to roll the carb. So now the choke cable is unplugged so that it's not mounted in there firmly, and we've got both throttle cables removed. So now what we do is we just loosen off these boots. There's a boot clamp at each side. And then you're able to spin the carb. And it's being able to spin the carb that makes this doable in the bike. And that's what makes it so fast to field service your carburetor. You can spin it both ways and get to both the top and the bottom of the carburetor. So by going to the bottom, you can get to all four bolts at the bottom, or all four screws, sorry, at the bottom of your float bowl. Now those screws are notorious for being weak. They want to strip out where the screwdriver goes in. They're not weak in hold, they're weak in the heads of them. So you have to be very careful when you take these off that you don't strip those Phillips out. Now I have one, the one that's the hardest to get to, that is starting to go from me, you know, pulling the float bowl. I did the KLX needle kit in there too, so I was in for that. And these are starting to get weak. Now, Eagle Mike has a kit that comes with the 8 screws that you need to replace all 8 of them, 4 top, 4 bottom for the carburetor, and I have ordered those. And they're a much stronger head. So what we're gonna do now is we're going to drain the float bowl out, get the majority of the fuel out of it. So now that the float bowl is drained, I spin it back around so that this is at the top, or so that the top is facing you. Loosen these 4. Don't take them off right away because inside there's a spring. If you're wondering why I'm using this, it's because I do all my service work on the bike with the tools that I carry on the bike. So this is out of the toolkit that I carry, and that allows me to make sure that I have the tools that I need when I'm in the field. It's a good thing to get used to. Even though you may have a really nice Phillips over there, it's a good idea to make sure that the one you carry will actually do the job. So keep a bit of pressure on that top cap until you get the screws out, and then gently release that, and you're going to get the spring and the cap. And then inside here you have the slide and the diaphragm and the needle. So you want to make sure that this doesn't have any gunk on it or anything like that, that it's all in good shape. You want to inspect this diaphragm if there's any tears or rips in it. That can cause loss of vacuum, and then your slide won't open and close when the vacuum is applied to it by turning the throttle. Now down in there, in the bottom of the carburetor, is the main jet that the needle sits in, and that can get full of stuff. We're gonna have a look at that from the bottom end of the carb too. But what we did on the trip was, while we had this out, we took our piece of hose and we put it down over that nice and tight, and I blew down through that jet in case there was any schmeg on the bottom of that jet. And that helps release anything out the bottom that might be jammed in, and then hopefully we'll see it from the other side. Other than that, there's some small vent lines here that I blew some air through, and then it was time to button the top end back up because it looks pretty clean in there. So buttoning it back up, it's the same thing. The slide goes back in, and then that diaphragm has to seat in a groove around there. So when you put in your spring and your top cap, there's a nib here that goes in the spring. Put that back over, and then gently wiggle that around until you feel it seat. And you can feel it clunk in when you do it. You want these snug but not over tight. You don't want to strip anything in here. And if you guys are anything like me, I tend to strip everything I touch, so just a wee little bit on those. Now we're just going to spin the carburetor in the boots, making sure again that that choke line is loose. We're going to turn them around like this. Get those out of the way for the time being. Then we're going to start to pop off the float bowl. Remember, these screws do not like to be undone, so getting the replacements is a really good idea. There it goes. Now there's going to be some fuel left in here, and it is going to spill out when you open it up, but that's totally normal. Now down in here, oh, you can see the water, look. See, there's water in my fuel too. See it laying down in there? You see those bubbles back and forth? So I may have got into a bit of bad fuel up there. It's very possible. That is interesting. Now my guess is that's likely condensation from my tank over the years, because I don't use my reserve almost ever, and I did switch it to reserve to see if that would help my situation when I was up there, and it may have sucked some of the water out of the bottom. But anyway, that's interesting, and likely a good thing I'm doing it again. But I had junk laying all down in here, great big pieces of black, what looked like gasket seal, and I have no idea what that was from, because I haven't used any gasket sealer on the bike. But somehow it got in the fuel tank and got sucked through. I don't even know. I have no explanation. But it was down in this bottom hole too, so I had to flush that out with some fuel out of the fuel tank and get it worked out of that hole so I could dump it. Now, in here you've got your float and needle. And the way it works is, when the float is low in the bowl, it opens that needle down out of its seat and allows fuel in to fill the float bowl, and as the fuel comes up in the float bowl, it raises this float and it pushes the needle back up against its seat, and it stops fuel coming in. So it's a very simple system. What you want to be very careful of if you guys are in here is that you don't adjust anything in here. This float has a little bit of an arm that catches in the bottom of the needle, and that arm being adjusted down or up can change how much fuel enters the float bowl. So at this point, if you know what you're doing, you can go ahead and pull that pin out, take out your needle and check it. If you're not sure, It doesn't have to be done. Chances are pretty good that everything in there is fine. But by dropping this little pin out that's in the center, see it? Do you see it just come up there? Maybe we'll just do it. Hang on. And there's the needle and float. And what I'm referring to here is this plate that actually hooks into the bottom of the needle. You want to make sure, that's how you can adjust it too, is by bending that down or up. But all you're looking for here on the end of the needle is that it doesn't have a ridge around it. Sometimes it'll build a ridge of junk around where it's been, if it's been stored or seated, this rubber end of the needle will get a bit of shit on it. So just make sure that's clean. If that's clean, my advice would be to leave it alone. Now with this out, you can spray in here with a carb cleaner or something if you wanted to clean out the top of your float bowl area, but typically everything's laying in the bottom and that's not necessary. But what we're going to focus on here are these jets. Now I'm going to go ahead and put this back in before I lose bits and pieces. Now this pin that I just put back in there can slide out the bottom too. There's nothing holding it. The ridges in the float bowl hold that pin from being able to move side to side. So you have to make sure that it doesn't drop out on you. Now we're going to remove the main jet and the jet holder. And that's the big one in the bottom. Gently. This is your jet, and this is the jet holder, and it has a whole bunch of holes up the rail. You can hold it up to the sky, and you should be able to see through all of those holes through the other side. There's holes both sides of that. I'm not sure if you guys will see that flash there or not, but that's what you do. I don't know if you guys can see that, but I have one that's blocked. There it is. Now it's open. Now this is also the same spot I put the hose on at the top and blew down. We're going to put him back in. And because my issue wasn't at idle, it was at the opening of the throttle, I know that if there was a problem, it was in that. That's this guy here. Jet holder and main jet. Your pilot jet is the one that's in beside it. And that one could also have some junk in it. So he could come out and be checked too, but for that you need a very small flathead screwdriver, which you may not have in your toolkit. We did not have that in our toolkit, but we have that in our toolkit now. So that's basically it. I think once you find that you're in here, this is where your problem is going to be. It's stuff floating around in that float bowl and coming up and potentially laying on that jet or getting sucked up into it and blocking that jet off. That certainly was my issue on the trip. And the amount of debris that was down here in the float bowl was, well, it was a little alarming for sure, because I try to take good care of my stuff, and I wouldn't have guessed that that much had gotten into the system. Now I was a little bit behind on starting installing my fuel filter, inline fuel filter. Usually I put one in as soon as I purchase a motorcycle. On the KLR, for some reason, I didn't. Not sure what that was all about, but you can't reach on it all, can you? But if I had put it in at the beginning, all that debris would be laying in the fuel filter, not in my float bowl. Again, just gentle. These don't need 1,000 foot-pounds of torque or anything. So this technique is also handy when you're doing the KLX needle kit, or if you're wanting to adjust your fuel mixture screw, which is up in here. You have to drill the cap out, and then once that cap's drilled out, then there's a screw in there you turn that adjusts your fuel mixture. You can enrich or lean. Yeah, and really that's it. It's just the reverse for buttoning it up. Let's just check that those are tight without putting too much force on them. And then he spins back around straight like this. Make sure your boot clamps are in an accessible position. I have that one at the top so I can go straight in on it, and I have that one sideways so I can come down on it. Not sure if yours will be in that configuration or if that's something I did when I put the crash bars on, can't remember. Then we reinstall the bracket. It has a little foot that sits on a pin. And the retainer screw. These go back through, line the cable up with the slot. The bottom nut into its holder, and that way it doesn't get adjusted. Slide the top one down. Same thing for this one. Line the cable up with the slot, squiggle it in there, and adjust the top one down, and nothing in the throttle has changed. Tighten those down so they don't come loose on you running down the highway. Now we're ready to tighten our boots back up. Now the reason this is so effective, or some of you might be asking, why are you going to all that work? Wouldn't it be easier to take the carb out? And the answer is actually no. The carburetor fits into these boots, and it can be a bit of a struggle getting them back in. Actually, it's more than a bit of a struggle. It's a major for sure. The easiest way to do it is to remove your bolts out of the rear subframe and let the rear subframe drop away. But this is incredibly simple. I don't know how long we've been at this, not long, and that's basically all I had to do on the side of the road too. Because after this part, now at this point, this side's all done, the top's done, the bottom's done, all the cables are back on and the boots are tightened. So going back around to this side and pressing the choke cable back into the carburetor is actually finishing up everything that you have to do to the carb. Now it's done. At this point, you just have to put this nut back in here to hold some of these electronics in place. And before you tighten that one down, make sure this lines up. Now you want to put your fuel tank back on, turn the petcock, turn the fuel on, let it fill the carburetor float bowl, start the bike, and make sure you're running. And this is where we let out with a resounding woo, because everything was back up. I could crack it wide open. It wasn't starving for fuel. It wasn't bogging. Everything was good. So then it was the fuel tank back on, do the 2 bolts through the side fairings into the fuel tank, 2 bolts here to hold the fuel tank on, vent line back on, fuel line's already on, your seat and your side covers, and we were back on the road. And I mean, even if you take your time, if you had an hour on the side of the road, this is completely doable. So the one thing I do carry in my toolkit that was super handy for this was a pair of the black nitrile gloves. When you're working on the side of the road, there's no way to wash your hands before you start handling the stuff that's in the carb, and so we had it all torn down. We were into the carb. I put the gloves on, worked on everything inside, took the gloves off, and then reassembled the bike in it. It keeps me from contaminating anything that's inside. So a pair, and I think you can get those anywhere, guys. Most of you likely have them, but having 2 or 3 pairs of those in your toolkit came in very handy. Other than that, that's it, and I was back up and running. Like I said, it didn't take very long. We were likely about an hour. It took longer for me to admit that that's what we needed to do. I knew I had to get into the car, but I didn't want to do it on the side of the road, and I stood around for about 30 minutes, hemming and hawing, and trying to think of everything else it could be, knowing full well that on these, they're so simple. If you have a fuel problem, you've got to start at the tank and make sure you have fuel out of your petcock, make sure that's not the issue, make sure there's fuel at the carburetor. I knew that that's what I had to do. So anyway, that's what we did, and of course, once I committed to it, an hour later, it was buttoned back up, running great, and we were carrying on. They're very simple machines. They're easy to work on. If you have the tools in your toolkit, and they're basic tools, we didn't use anything today that was crazy, you're good to go. So I hope that helps somebody out. It really helped us out on the trip, having done it before and knowing that I could do it in the bike without having to take the carb right out. Thanks for watching, guys. Mind how you go if you're out riding, and don't forget to check out the Patreon page if you find any of this stuff at all helpful. There's more info over there. I'm going to try to build up a bit of a catalog over there of some of the stuff that doesn't make it to the main channel. But yeah, that's it for me. Thanks for watching. Take care. Mason out. Hey guys, if you liked that video, hit the thumbs up button for us. It goes a long way towards helping out the channel. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button in the upper corner for new videos every Sunday. Be glad to have you along for the ride.